Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most interesting topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 195th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 650th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, November 19th, 2020. I am your host, Brian Tonsoni. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call, how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Martin takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment is a call to remember something special. It's Indiana. Yes, Trace Jackson Davis was named to the Naismith Award watch list. Yes, we witnessed the shortened taped Hoosier Hysteria. And yes, we saw the release of the Big Ten basketball schedule. All interesting Indiana news. But I remind you, it's Indiana. As Hoosier fans, we love our basketball, we love Assembly Hall, and we cherish our banners. We support a number 9 ranked football team, a number 15 ranked women's basketball team, a national championship soccer program, a top-level baseball team, and all the other sports on campus. We as fans support the motto, 24 sports, one team. We wear the candy stripes, we buy Bison sweatshirts, and we celebrate on Kirkwood Avenue. We are blessed with the voices of Don Fisher and Greg Murray calling the action. We sink the biz. We sing the alma mater loud and proud, and we root like hell. It's Indiana. So a new basketball season draws near. It's time to cheer a dunk from TJD, question the sub-patterns of Coach Miller, ask why we stay too long on ball screen hedges, but appreciate a good shooting effort and love us some Hoosier toughness. It's time to beat Ohio State in football, and it's time for all of us to be back in Assembly Hall. Well, at least virtually. Remember, it's Indiana. LEO. Okay, and now let me esteem my co-host for this week's, one of my co-hosts for this week's show.
You'll have fun. The Hoosiers make the tourney again. Fun. The Hoosiers make the tourney again. Fun.
To my left,
Fun.
it is the famous Andy Bottoms. Andy, what's on your mind this week?
Well, I mean, the schedule news is the big one from a basketball perspective. I know we'll get into that. You didn't get the most favorable of Big Ten draws as you go through, but I think it'll all be a good test for this team, and remains to be seen. Focusing a lot on the home road, it remains to be seen how much of a factor that really is this year. But as you mentioned, just a lot of great things going on from an IU sports perspective. Had the Hoosier Hysteria for the women's team tonight, which we'll also talk about later, and just a lot of excitement building around that program, even though there's less known about the schedule, as we were talking about with our guests before the show. And then from a football perspective, big game against Ohio State over the weekend, and a really good piece that I retweeted earlier that I know a number of other people have as well, from John Blau, just talking about Tom Allen and some of the things that he's done to motivate players as he was coming up, even as a high school coach. Just a really good read about the kind of guy that Coach Allen is, and maybe they can shock everybody over the weekend. But like I said, a lot of good things going on in the IU sports world, and looking forward to hitting on a number of those tonight.
And to my right, he is the voice of IU women's basketball, co-hosts the IU football post-game show with Ken Bykoff. And Greg, and you do baseball as well, correct? Indiana
That's right.
Baseball, because my son absolutely cannot wait to hear your voice from Bart Kaufman. And he mentioned that tonight, how excited he is that you're on the show. We welcome you, Greg, to the Assembly Call. How are you feeling overall about IU sports scene right now?
Well, I appreciate you guys having me, and it's exciting to be able to have something to talk about, right? It's been football, which has been a wonderful story for the last month plus, and obviously a monster of an opportunity for the Hoosiers this weekend. But, being on the post-game call-in show with Ken's been a blast these last 4 weeks, and it's been fun to watch the national recognition from Tom Allen, and you're starting to hear, on College Game Day, Indiana being just a regular name they're throwing around, and people that are a little bit behind the times, if you will, from a national perspective, but those that have followed Tom Allen and followed the Indiana program, you've seen the progress. It's building. now it's fun to see that on a national perspective. So a huge game this weekend and a huge opportunity the rest of the way for those guys. And then, before I hopped on with you guys tonight, it was really the first time I've sat down to prepare my broadcast spotting board, which just as a broadcaster is so much fun. It's such a relief that it's here, and Andy, you mentioned it for the women's side. The men's schedule came out. The women is still much more of a question mark on who and when they're going to play, but I know it's coming soon. And so I was able to put together my spotting board. So it's just getting that itch again. It's starting to feel like basketball season, which here around Bloomington and in this state is a time unlike any other.
Yeah, it's time. It's been a long time, and in March, the seasons for both the women and the men ended so quickly. So here's what we're going to talk about this week. The men's schedule came out, both the non-conference and then just recently the conference schedule came out. We're going to look at the outlook for those women who are ranked, and for the men who start their season as soon as possible. Hopefully next Tuesday for the men, and soon for the women, and then we'll take your questions. All of that coming up this week on the Assembly Call Radio. Before we get to all of that, I want to tell you about a new sponsor who is joining us here on the Assembly Call. It's Superior Insulation, a.k.a. Superior Insulators. And this sponsor relationship started like so many of our others have, because the owner of the business, Brad, is a loyal listener to the show and a longtime IU fan and season ticket holder. So with winter right around the corner, the timing is perfect to tell you about Superior Insulators and why you should consider giving them a call. What do Superior Insulators do? They provide high-performance insulation and air barrier systems to the residential, commercial, and agriculture sectors. In other words, they help you live and work more comfortably by fixing drafty rooms, cold floors, and excess noise in your home and office, and they help you save money on your energy bills in the process. Yes, more comfort and more cost savings. That's a real TJD double-double right there. And just in case you're wondering about their track record, let me sum it up in one word: excellence. That's right. The Superior Insulators did all the air barrier systems and spray foam for the new IU Excellence Academy. Brad and his team also worked on the new football locker room, Marching 100 Hall, and many other buildings on campus, so they're kind of a big deal. And best of all for you, they have a special offer for Assembly Call listeners. You will get a $50 home field apparel gift card when you call and schedule an appointment in a qualifying area. They have 4 locations covering roughly the southern 2/3 of Indiana, plus the northern part of Kentucky. Just tell them Assembly Call sent you, and you'll get your gift card. So visit insulators.com to learn more and schedule your appointment. Then Brad and his team can help you create a healthier, quieter, and more efficient, energy-efficient home. That's insulators.com, insulators.com to learn more. And tell them the Assembly Call sent you to get your $50 home field gift card. And so, fellas, the men's basketball schedule came out. We kind of knew a week or so ago the non-conference schedule, and we'll hit on that real quickly here. But there's 7 games in the non-conference with a 20-game Big Ten schedule. A couple of traditional bye games in Tennessee Tech and North Alabama, teams that are projected at the bottom of their respective leagues, and a Power 5 matchup with Butler, who is probably in the bottom half of the Big East. And then you have the Asheville Classic, also formerly known as the Maui Classic, where Indiana could play some teams like Texas, North Carolina, scheduled to start with Providence, and then at Florida State in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. So, Andy, your thoughts on the non-conference schedule for the Indiana Hoosiers?
I think the non-conference is a pretty good mix. As you mentioned, you've got those couple more traditional bye games, which really got squeezed out by the scheduling limitations. So you figure there's a couple wins there. I think Butler's a game that they should win. The at Florida State game is potentially a tall order, although they're replacing a lot of pieces. So maybe getting them early in the year is helpful, but maybe you assume you lose that one and then you try to go 2-1 in Maui/Asheville, and you get to 5-2 in a non-conference schedule that's going to be pretty full of major conference teams, depending upon who IU ends up playing in Maui. So I think it's a decent mix. The Tennessee Tech game gives you a chance to get your feet wet and see what happens, but not a lot of nights off, I would say, in general. And certainly the same will hold true as you get into the Big Ten portion of things.
Greg, your thoughts as that non-conference schedule came out for the men's team overall?
Yeah, I think it's important what Andy just referenced. You kind of just dive right in, right? It's been a really unique off season, and so everybody's non-conference schedule is going to be a little bit wonky. It's going to be all over the place. Some teams are going to maybe have a much more top-heavy type schedule. Others are going to, they're just trying to get games in, right? You're trying to schedule. You're trying to play all these games that we're looking at on the schedule. At this point, you hope they all happen in the time that they're supposed to and the travel that's in, So from the on-the-floor perspective, I think it's important just to dive in and see what you have. I think Tennessee Tech's a great way to start, and then you'll see some decent competition there at the Maui Invitational. It's weird calling it that. And then obviously the big task that is Florida State for the ACC Challenge. So that's always a great time. You end it with Butler in mid-December with the Crossroads Classic. So, it's a good mix of competition, and I find it hard to really nitpick on kind of what the schedule is just because of how odd and weird this year is. The fact that you have 7 games on the schedule before just the grind of the Big Ten comes around, I think will be good for these guys to see, where the bar's at when you get into league play.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Andy and I are involved in bracketology too, to see the difference in scheduled games. Some team plays 17, another plays 22, depending on cancellations, or if someone plays a complete 27. But the one thing I think the non-conference schedule does for Indiana, gives them opportunities to get some good wins. And the strength of schedule will be there for the Hoosiers when it comes tournament selection time. And then recently, the Big Ten schedule came out, and unfortunately, we don't play a round robin where you play every team twice. And so there's some imbalance issues at times with the schedule. And this year it seems like Indiana's Big Ten schedule, we got the tough end of the draw by who we play twice, according to preseason outlook. So Indiana plays single plays against 4 of the bottom 5 projected teams, and they have double plays against 6 of the top 8. So when you look at it, it looks like that non-conference schedule that's relatively tough for Indiana continues into the Big Ten. But my first question for both of you, and we'll start with you, Greg, is this: with no fans in the stands, Assembly Hall is an advantage. It's been an advantage for the men and for the women lately, with increased crowd size, which has been tremendous. The support for our women's program too. That Assembly Hall has been a great home court advantage, and the Big Ten and the men's has really been a strong. It's difficult to win on the road. What kind of things do you think will be different this year without fans as far as home court advantage?
Yeah, I think it's different. I think you're seeing that with football. This weekend's a prime example. Indiana football going to Ohio State. The Buckeyes playing in the Horseshoe, Michigan playing in the Big House, Penn State at home. Those are huge advantages, and there's no substitute for that. And for whatever it is, you don't have that this year. And so, there's certainly an advantage from a comfort perspective, playing at home, being in the locker room, being able to go shoot on the rims that you're familiar with, so there is that familiarity and that comfort level that allows you to play from home. But there's going to be a big piece missing from Assembly Hall this year. And so I think as Indiana goes on the road, as they welcome teams in, it's going to be, a big neutralizer. And so Indiana's going to have to find a way at home to make sure they bring that extra juice that the fans bring at Assembly Hall that's simply not going to be there. But everybody's going to have to deal with that, right? That's going to be a big challenge for some of these teams that are playing at home. But, perhaps it makes it more of a winnable, if you will, situation when you go away from Assembly Hall. But then on this same token, other schools are thinking that same thing when they come to Bloomington.
Andy, when the schedule came out yesterday, I know our group texted back and forth. Your initial thoughts, it does look like there's a chance to get off to a good start, but it's going to be a tough grind for Indiana in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think certainly on the surface, it looks like it's difficult. You never really know whether these teams are going to live up to whatever preseason billing they have. And it's one of those where, I tried to focus, I guess, a little bit more on who you had double plays against, as opposed to, where the single plays actually were just because of what we said. I think, you certainly have the comforts of home and some of those kinds of things, but at least from a fan perspective, it won't be there. I have no idea what some of these places are going to look like from a shooting backdrop standpoint when there's not fans behind the baskets and different things like that. You don't know what kind of impact that may have just from a depth perception and some of those kinds of things. So you really just don't know what to expect, but certainly on the surface, it looks pretty tough. As you mentioned, you do have a reasonable chance to get off to a good start. 3 of the first 4 are at home. Again, how much does that matter? But to me, it's more the fact that, that those home games are Northwestern, Penn State, Maryland, all picked to finish toward the bottom of the league. Now you've got a road trip to Illinois mixed in there as well, but at least you got a chance to get out of the chute pretty fast. But the middle stretch is really tough. I mean, you go Purdue at Michigan State, at Iowa, Rutgers at Michigan, Illinois and Iowa at home. So you've got a lot of games there against the teams picked to finish toward the top of the league, and all those games against teams that are at least picked to be in the mix for an at-large spot in the tournament. So that'll be a big, make or break stretch there. But win some of those first games, get some confidence, and the other thing you don't know, in addition to what teams are going to be like, is by the time you get to some of these games, what personnel are you going to have? What personnel is somebody else going to have? Who's coming back off of a quarantine or something like that? So it's all pretty surface level stuff at this point, because these games could take on a life of their own, dependent upon when you play somebody and who they've got available. So tough to say, but certainly at first glance, it's not the easiest in the world. Like a couple other teams with Michigan and Purdue were the couple that stood out to me that had a little bit easier way to go.
And the way I'm looking at it too, from a bracketology perspective, it gives Indiana chances to get good wins, and who knows, with all the net and Ken Pom and all the things that have been traditionally used by the NCAA committee, they may simply look at with a variety of numbers, how many big wins did you have? Obviously you can't go 8-12 or something this year in the Big Ten, I think, and make the tournament, but playing the big boys can have a stronger schedule can really benefit in a year like this, that you have more chances for those wins instead of just piling up wins against teams that are inferior. So at least maybe that's just me being hopeful after looking at the schedule. Greg, I'm going to throw a little curveball in this, because I want to ask from an announcer's point of view. You're getting ready to call some women's games, and it'll be without fans. Have you thought about what that's going to be like and how weird that will be for you? And then a little bit of extra pressure on you to bring the game to everyone who's listening, who can't get in. There's going to be more people tuning in because of the success of the women.
Yeah, obviously you wish that fans would be able to pack Assembly Hall, both men and women, but it doesn't look like it's going to be that. So from a radio perspective, I suppose a little bit more pressure on me to paint that picture. And same goes for Don, as the eyes and the ears and everything in between. For a women's game, it doesn't draw as the men do as far as selling out Assembly Hall and things like that. But, for anyone that's followed along with the success of the women's program, these, really since Terry Moran's been here the last 6+ years, the attendance numbers have jumped and they've jumped dramatically and are continuing to do so. And you would think that, with the expectations that they have for this season, that the numbers attendance wise would be even greater. But it's definitely going to be weird, from a broadcaster standpoint. I think there's a little bit more strategy on maybe where to put those NAT sound mics and, the rim mics. They might pick up a little bit more audio than we're used to, which can be good and bad, depending. We've all been in live competition and knows what noises and maybe verbiage that can come out of there. So it'll be an adjustment. There's no doubt about that. But from a radio perspective, I hope I can paint that picture. As we said, it's going to be really interesting going on the road because Don and myself, men's and women, we will not be traveling. So that's going to be a whole wrinkle to – it's going to be a whole different setup when we get into Big Ten play and are traveling on the road and have to broadcast from somewhere that's not the live basketball arena, that we're calling games for. So it's going to be different. for everybody involved, players and coaches, and we're tossing broadcasters into the mix too.
Well, we have a lot of faith in you, Greg. We know that you're going to do a great job. So, okay, coming up, Hoosier Hysteria is now in the books, so it's time to look ahead to the regular season for the men's and women's team and look forward to them actually getting on the court and playing games. So what are the outlooks for each squad this season? We'll discuss next. Stick with us.
Hi, this is AJ Moye. What's the only thing better than upsetting Duke in the Sweet 16? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join Jared, Andy, Ryan, and Coach for the assembly call after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers.
Welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com. And if you ever want to join the chat mob during our unedited live broadcast or watch these replays and see all the between segment banner, then check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/assemblycall. I'm the coach, Brian Tonsoni. I'm here with Andy Bottoms and our special guest, Greg Murray. And now it's time to talk a little women's basketball. As our 15th ranked women's team is preparing to start the season. And we're not sure of the schedule quite yet. It's up in the air because of the health situation. But we're excited about this team. And Greg does the broadcast for the women's team. So we've brought on the expert to talk a little women's basketball. And if we would start out, Greg, you just give us the pitch, the elevator pitch for people who might not know about the women's program and how exciting it is to watch these women play.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's first and foremost, it's a terrific brand of basketball. These are really, really good players that play together very well, and it's been amazing to watch. 6 years that Terry Morin has been with this team, now entering year 7. Just the steady growth from year 1 where the program was, and it had maybe a little bit of momentum, but still with a lot of work. And Coach Morin was able to build it from starting with the recruiting classes of Tyra Buss and Amanda Cahill that were freshmen in Coach Morin's first year. And obviously it's grown a lot since that time and now have household names in the women's basketball world, at least in the Big Ten, certainly in Allie Patberg and Grace Berger. They're in the conversation for one of the more talented backcourts in certainly the Big Ten, the region, if not the whole country. I mean, this is an experienced group. Many have played since their first step on campus. So now as upperclassmen, they're experienced. This team was posed to do things that this program hasn't done in a long, long time. Last year, they set a program record of 24 wins and obviously didn't get a shot in the NCAA tournament. They were going to be between that 4 and 5 seed, and you lose only one starter from a year ago in Brenna Wise, who was a big role last year, certainly. But those names I mentioned of Grace Berger and Jalen Penn and not the least of which Allie Patberg coming back, this team's going to be really special, I think, and should be a whole lot of fun to watch and follow along with all season.
Yeah, it was interesting watching the Hoosier Hysteria video last night. They had a segment of it for those who didn't watch it where Coach Morin was mic'd up. And I mean, every missed shot, every rebound off of it was go, get out and run. So they do play an exciting brand of basketball, but also really, I think a number of people have said this. If you really want to watch, good fundamentals and things like that, the women's game is a great place to do that. I know we got the chance to go down for a game last year and then subsequently watched a whole bunch of games with both my daughters who like to play. And it does give you a good understanding and perspective on the fundamentals and what they do. And Coach Morin does a really good job with that. So Greg, you mentioned a number of the players there. So this might be a difficult question to answer with most of the roster back, as you mentioned, really outside of Brenna Wise. Is there a player that you see maybe really making the leap from last year to this year?
Two come to mind. I think Grace Berger, first and foremost, at that 2-3 guard position, she might be the most talented player. Coach Morin, in my conversations with her through the preseason and in our Hoosier Hysteria interview that we had where we sat down for a few minutes, has mentioned a few times that, more often than not in practice, Grace Berger has been the most talented player on the floor. She does things on the court that other players can't do. She has a terrific, consistent mid-range jumper. She's got good ball handling skills. She's continued to work year in, year out, now entering her junior season, but trying to improve that 3-point shot. But can create her own shot, one of those players that you can rely on late in game when you need a bucket. And then I'd go to a player that's going to start for a second year or is on the team for a second year, and sophomore Mackenzie Holmes, who's out of Gorham, Maine, who was more of the sixth player role at the post position coming off the bench last year. But I expect her to make a big jump from that freshman to sophomore year. I see her inserting now into the starting lineup, and I expect her to be in the conversation for an all-conference type position. She was an all-freshman team honoree last year and put up good numbers, a few double-doubles, and certainly made an impact. But I know her conditioning has improved. She's got great hands and good ability to finish around the rim. And she's also gained the ability, according to Coach Moran, to step it out behind the three-point line. She didn't even attempt a three-pointer last year, but Coach Moran's talked a lot about her ability to use the three this year and the way that she's expanded her game. So I think what stands out about this team is that all 5 spots at any point in time during the game could go get you a bucket if you need to. And again, it starts at the point guard with Allie Patberg, but it can go to a guard spot with Grace Berger and Jalen, or in the post, Alexa Gulbey's a strong center or forward position, and then Mackenzie Holmes in there as well.
Yeah, the Mackenzie Holmes thing was interesting. I listened to the interview with Coach Moran about her stepping out to shoot threes. So if that works well to go with her post move, just to go back to the fundamentals, she's one that really has good footwork in the post, and came in as a freshman and was able to really do well against tough competition because of that. So I know you were going to jump in, Coach, but
I was just going to ask. There's a couple of newcomers on the roster that had set out as transfers that come from that have had good pedigrees in college game, playing at the University of Notre Dame with Danielle Patterson, and I'm going to totally butcher Nicole's last name, but she was A-10 Player of the Year before she transferred and sat out a year. So if you could help me with the last name, but what kind of impact will those two, after sitting out a year, transfer make for the women's program?
Yeah, so and I'm not going to quite say it right because I don't know how to roll my N's yet, but out of Madrid, Spain, it's Nicole Cardaño Hillary, and that was the very American way to say that. But they had in the player introductions in the Hoosier Hysteria last night, the women's program had their parents video record them, introduce them, and Nicole's dad rolled it perfectly. So I'm going to rewatch that video as the season gets started so I know how to say her name properly. So she comes out in transfer, and she's interesting because, at least as we have it right now, she just transferred this last offseason. So it has not quite come out yet officially if she is going to be eligible this year or not. If she is, then I expect her to be a nice threat on the outside. She's a guard at 5'7", very experienced. She comes off as just a terrific scorer on the offensive end. And then, as you mentioned, Brian, in the front court, Danielle Patterson, who comes out of Notre Dame, and Indiana's had some good luck with the Notre Dame transfer. Allie Patberg came a few years prior. So Danny's a terrific teammate. Excited to see what she can do on the floor. She had a pretty serious knee injury once she got here to Bloomington. So it will be interesting to see maybe where she's at physically. And I don't mean from not a health perspective. I know she's 100% and was moving up and down the floor, even in practice last year when everything got shut down. But just from a live game action, it's been some time since she's been out there. So a player that knows a whole lot about college basketball, can do a lot of different things. And I think with some time, she'll continue to improve every single game. It can provide some depth at that maybe 3-4 spot probably for Danny based off of her size. So Indiana's going to have the ability to play big. They could play small and mix it up a little bit lineup wise. And those two, or certainly that one with Danielle Patterson, will allow them to do that.
Yeah, you mentioned the player intros from last night. My favorite, and probably a lot of people's, was Alexa Gulbe's family from Latvia. That was fantastic. So you touched on this with Coach Morin during your interview, but they came out and were picked as the preseason favorites to win the Big Ten. Certainly a change for them to be the hunted and not really the one on the come up trying to do some things. So you've been around the team as much as certainly more than Coach or I. How do you feel like they're set up to deal with those kinds of expectations?
Well, I picked them. I have one of the media votes that Coach Morin was pretty quick to say it's not that she doesn't care what the media thinks, but what stood out to her was that the coaches also chose her program as the preseason favorite. And so I think that spoke to, her peers, Coach Morin's peers around the league are picking up on, the success that this program's having and the expectations. But they don't try. She talks in coach speak. They don't talk a whole lot about it. They'd much rather be at the top of the polls and at the top of the conference in March or at the end of February than here we are in early November. But it's fun for us three to talk about, and certainly it's fun for me to talk about on the radio. But I picked Indiana to win. The interesting aspect with this year specifically, win the Big Ten for women's basketball, is that the Big Ten in this sport truly is Maryland's league until proven otherwise. They have always been, at the top of the league, whether it's ACC or since they moved over to the Big Ten. Nationally, they've always gotten a whole lot of recognition, and they recruit that way. They have some of the best athletes and the best talent in all of the country every single year. They graduated a 4-year starter in Kyla Charles, who was, in my opinion, one of the better players in the last 2 decades. I think in this league, very underrated player, kind of a do-everything player. She graduated last year from Maryland, and then they had 2 other starters, lost them due to transfer, who are both all-conference picks. So Maryland, not to say that they're down, but they have lost some talent from previous years, and so maybe have a little bit more unknowns on their roster. Northwestern had a very good year. They were co-champs last year. And then there's Indiana, who finished 4th in the league last year, was well on their way to a solid seed in the NCAA tournament. And as we've talked about, they didn't lose a whole lot. So they're a proven commodity. And I think this could be the year that, someone is there to overtake Maryland and kind of make that next step for the rest of the league. But Michigan's going to be solid. There's a lot of good, solid basketball teams in the Big Ten, which is no surprise. And I expect Indiana to be right there in the mix at the top.
Well, Coach Morin's just done, from my vantage point, just an excellent job of building that program. And it took some time early, and then eventually with the NIT championship, and then you've just seen solid progress since then to now where they're the conference favorites. It's just really good to see. Compare that a little bit to where the men are. In year 4 of Archie Miller, projected to be 7th or 8th in a very tough Big Ten. Is it fair to make those comparisons, or are the programs at 2 different spots due to the length of the coaches being there? And what do you expect from the men this year in their season?
Yeah, I don't know that it's quite an apples to apples comparison, just based on, I think, the fact that you have players coming into these schools, Indiana and most other schools in the league, that don't stay for 4 years. That's not a common thing in the women's game. It's more of a build up for 4, or in Ali Patberg's case, 6 years, to really develop these players in these teams. And, I don't know that it's fair to compare, finishing at a certain spot in the conference and where they line up. And as far as the men's expectations this year, I think obviously with Trace in the middle, the potential is high, but it's the Big Ten. I don't know how much of a difference there is from, maybe not 1 to 7, but that 4 to 7, you get in the mix where they're separated by a game or 2, and you upset 1 or 2 teams, and you're right there in the mix towards the end. So the Big Ten is the Big Ten. It's going to beat you up for 2 months, 2+ months, however long it is, but for 20 games. And if you don't show up one night, you're going to get blown out the gym. And that, I think, is something you compare with from the women's game or the men's game. You got to bring it every night, and it's the Big Ten Conference. It helps you get that seeding for the NCAA tournament. It's got a great reputation, and, that's why it's the Big Ten. That's why we love it.
Yeah. So kind of similar question to what we talked about with the women's team. Is there, a player or two that you'd really look at on the men's side that really expecting to take a leap, whether it's a guy going from a freshman to sophomore or something like that, anybody or just somebody you're really looking forward to watch?
I've always been a big Jerome Hunter fan. I mean, it's he's a guy that I've always been, you're just kind of waiting for him to take off and have a breakout game. He's kind of been my guy that I've kept my eyes on for the years he's been here. Trace is as fun as anybody to watch. Rob Finnessy at the point guard spot's been fun to watch, just from a day one starter. I'm a big fan of those guys that come in, make an impact right away, and you can just see the growth from one year to the next. So I guess off the top of my head, those are the three that stand out. And then, of course, you have the veterans and that have been here for a lot of years that are hoping to maybe play one final season and kind of go out on a high note.
So Greg, again, I'm going to throw another curveball because I'm fascinated by the work that you do as a radio broadcaster. A couple years back on the Talking Hoosier baseball podcast, I had the privilege of interviewing you. I think you were in Omaha for the Big Ten championship at that time, and we asked you about how do you prepare to call a game, and it was fascinating to me. I think you had different colored pens, if I remembered right, for certain things, and you talked about being excited earlier about getting your call sheet and your information ready. So we have a couple minutes here left in this segment. Could you share with our listeners how you prepare to call a basketball game and what that call sheet kind of the details of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two legal sheets of paper that I have, a roster, and it's filled out with their stats. Early in the season, I keep it from the previous years, but points per game, rebounds per game, the whole sort. As I call the game, I keep track of points and fouls. It just helps me with the flow of the game. But next to each player, I have room for individual notes, and I have tabbed with different colored pens. I know off the top of my head, if I'm looking for a stat, that if it's a note from like a previous season or something like that, that's in green. Personal notes are in purple. And then in just regular pen can be, if so-and-so is third in the league in scoring, or they've averaged 15 a game over their last 4. Trends is how I like to phrase it. And then at the top, I have room for my team notes, the general talking points, whether it's pregame show or kind of keys to the game that I want to follow along with throughout. Women's basketball is different than, the men's basketball broadcast with Don and Eric, because they can kind of bounce off of one another, where I'm the play-by-play, I'm the color. So to come unprepared is not something that I'm willing to do, because I'll pay for it. If I'm not, I'm going to struggle. It's going to be a lot of dead air and uncomfortable awkwardness on the air, which I like to avoid if at all possible. So can never be over prepared. I enjoy it. And I think the day that I don't enjoy the preparation, reading the game notes is the time that I need to decide to do something else. So I love it. I was excited to look into some possible opponents for the women's basketball team. The only one on the schedule that I saw via social media today was the Kentucky Wildcats, which will be a wonderful top 15 test for the Hoosiers. They're ranked somewhere like 10 to 12 and have one of the best scorers in the country in Ryan Howard, who's a junior for the Kentucky Wildcats. So the Hoosiers will be heading down there. That's the only game I know that they're going to have pre-Big Ten, but I expect the non-conference to come out anytime. So I'm just excited to get back to the hall, get back on the radio, and doing play-by-play. There's nothing like it.
So you're the Vin Scully of Indiana athletics broadcasting when you do all these games by yourself. We appreciate that, Greg. We're excited about both teams, the men's and the women's, here at the Assembly Call. We think it's going to be a fantastic hoop season, whatever games we get from the schedules that we get, and we're looking forward to tuning into your broadcast. So coming up here in our third segment, we'll answer your questions. We also will talk a little bit about the NCAA tournament in Indianapolis and those Indiana football Hoosiers. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call.
Hey, it's Romeo Langford. What's the only thing better than hitting a game winner to beat Wisconsin? Celebrate it with friends afterwards. Join Jarrett, Andy, Ryan, and Coach on assembly call after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers.
Thanks, Romeo. Hope you're getting ready for your second season and everything's healthy. But I'm Brian Tonsone. I'm here with Andy Bottoms and our special guest, Greg Murray. Remember, you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup, even during the offseason, and after every game, we send out a detailed post-game analysis. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. It's time now for our mailbag. All questions were submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community at assemblycall.com/community. And we're going to start with Tyler's question tonight. What are the main things that you look for when IU plays a lesser opponent? For the men, it's like Tennessee Tech. How is this different when they play a more competitive team? So, Andy, we'll start with you, and let's take it from the men's program. We'll go to Greg next for the women's program. What do you look for in playing a bye game or a weaker opponent versus a more competitive opponent?
Yeah, well, I'll certainly look for you to jump in, even from a coaching standpoint, when we kind of swing it back around. But, I think for the Tennessee Tech game in particular, it's been a long time since these guys have played. I think it's just getting the rust off as much as anything. And I think as a coach, we've seen Archie and try to schedule, when you've got more of these bye games, try to figure out how do you get teams with some different styles that might present different challenges for your team. Either somebody that plays really small, somebody that plays really fast and presses a lot. You don't have the luxury of that when you basically have two of those kinds of games this year. And I don't know enough about Tennessee Tech to know, kind of which of those columns they might fall in. But I think you're able to experiment with some different lineup combinations for the freshmen, be able to get them some action, and ideally be able to get them a decent amount of action to, kind of see who works well together and try some things out that you might have put in. You talked about making some notes on during the video from last night. What different things are they going to try to do offensively? I think defensively, what you're going to get out of this team and how they're going to execute it. But offensively, do you try some new stuff, see if you can find some things that work, put some things on film for other people to watch, at least, that you may have plans for later. So I think it's just in this season in particular, it's mostly about getting the rust off and actually running through something against somebody who might not know what's coming, as opposed to doing it in practice. And really, it almost takes the place of what you'd normally do in an exhibition game, where you get some of those things out. And so I think that's why it's important to have a game like that at the as the opener.
Greg, your thoughts from the women's program perspective on playing teams that you kind of expect to win versus those teams that are highly competitive?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Andy just said. I think this year in particular, it's just going to be good to see the teams out there on the floor again. But I think, you talk about what maybe we look for is the newcomers, how they impact the game, how they transition from the high school game to the college game, or how the transfers fit in. Do you want to mix up lineups? Do you want to try and go big, go small? And I think for the non-conference in particular, you look for teams that can, maybe some that can run a little bit more. You play maybe some other teams that really like to slow the game down. You play teams that do a variety of things, because, you see it every year that you get into the NCAA tournament and you see such contrasting styles that you don't want to be unprepared. You want to see a little bit of everything throughout the regular season, though, so that even if you're not, fully prepared for it, you've at least seen a lineup like this, or seen a lineup that does whatever this team that you're playing against brings to the table. And then when you play the big teams, a good team early in the season in the non-conference, to me, it's just a measuring stick. I think that's the biggest thing I look for is, I mentioned earlier that IU women's basketball is going to play Kentucky. They're going to go down to Lexington and play them on the road. That, to me, is Indiana's first chance to say, all right, how good are you? Where do you stack up against another team that's got, weekend 2 aspirations when it comes to the NCAA tournament? So that, I guess, are the big things that I look for when you're talking a smaller school, maybe that that you would expect to beat versus a team that is of a higher magnitude, if you will.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. From a coaching perspective, it's also what do you do early in the season versus later when you play a lot more competitive teams in the conference. But you want to get things on film. Film study is a huge part of the game of basketball. It is at our level at high school. We had our high school scrimmage last night. We learned so much as coaches, and then when we have film session with our players, you learn so much when you get something on film. If you play a lesser opponent early, you can try out a lot of different things and figure out what you like. If you start out the season and you play tougher opponents, you've got to choose the things that are going to help you win. So the game planning is a little bit different. But again, Andy mentioned getting some players some playing time against some of those lesser opponents is very valuable in case there needs to be an injury or a role changing. But I think that's Tyler. The main difference between those two things. Let's talk a little bit of Indiana football as we have about three minutes plus left. Big game against Ohio State. Just a pleasure to watch. This might be the best team I've seen, and I've been a season ticket holder since 1985. Greg, your thoughts on the upcoming battle with Ohio State?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. I think Indiana, weird season or not, I think they were ready to do a high level of football all season long, but playing at a high level and playing against Ohio State are not always the same thing. Usually they're not. Now, we talked earlier playing without fans. That's a factor in this game. This is not the same trip to Columbus that Indiana plays in years past. This would be not the first test by any stretch because Penn State they're not maybe as good as maybe we thought they were. Michigan, kind of the same deal, going through some trouble. You kind of know who Ohio State is. They have a quarterback that not many schools have. They have players in a lot of positions that not a lot of players have. But Indiana's going to give them their best punch. There's no doubt about that. They believe they're behind Coach Allen, and I know this game's one I'm looking forward to maybe more than I've been looking forward to a game in a long, long time.
Andy, is competitive good enough, or are we holding out for a win here on Saturday? What's your feeling?
As somebody who lives in Ohio and is surrounded by Ohio State fans, I would love nothing more than a win. But I do think being competitive against a team as talented as Ohio State would, Tom Allen isn't going to sit here and say I'm here for moral victories and any of those kinds of things. But I do think it would, kind of similar to what Greg talked about before. It is a measuring stick game. Maybe these other teams that they played aren't as good as everybody thought they were. I'm not convinced that they're as bad as everybody's making them out to be now, though. And I think it does give you a chance to see, because if you perform well in this game, even if you come up short and perform well, then you really look down the rest of the schedule. The trip to Wisconsin is going to be difficult for sure, as it always is. But again, you take the crowd out of the equation, you do some of those things. So I think IU is going to be able to put some points on the board. I think defensively how they can do something to contain Fields. But you also look the talent gap is still there between these two teams, but it has closed dramatically over the course of the last couple years. And we'll get a chance to see just how much over the weekend. Yeah,
I've been watching Indiana football, and I kind of grew up when I was in college watching Anthony Thompson, Dave Schnell. I was there when 2 straight wins against Ohio State and beating Michigan as a college student. And this is the best team. This is the most comfortable that I felt watching Indiana football. Instead of wondering, what's going to happen. Are they going to jump offsides on a punt on 4th and 4? It's just like, okay, interception by Penix. The first possession, okay, the defense will get it back for them. This team is talented. It's confident. Coach has done a great job. And you have to be realistic. A lot of teams going into Columbus will have a real tough task ahead. So I'm not going to predict anything other than we're going to get a great effort by the Indiana Hoosiers. We're going to see Tom Allen jump up and down and give high fives. And I think we're going to have an enjoyable Saturday afternoon, regardless of the outcome.
That's it. We're done. No more questions.
Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Assembly Call. We'd like to thank Greg Murray for joining us and talking about the Indiana's women's basketball program. If you want to see us do the live show, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. Don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for producing most of the music you hear on the show, and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next Thursday night.
Take it from me, Christian Waffle. Keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. Go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
And that's a wrap. I keep you guys for at least one question about the Indianapolis tournament, and then I'm going to go over some of my takes and answer maybe some questions from the chat mob about the Hoosier Hysteria thing that we saw. Thoughts about moving the tournament to one location, Greg? Do you think it would be great if there were fans, because I would be down in Indianapolis and bouncing around and taking 2 days off or 3 weeks off of work, but your thoughts about in the current situation, if that's a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, I think we all wish we could have been there. You hear Indianapolis, and it's like, oh, that's great. Oh, there's probably not going to be any fans there, so it doesn't matter in that sense. But I think Indy is built for something like this. I think it's such a wonderful city to host big sporting events, from Super Bowls to, regular NCAA tournament weekends. There's enough venues, I think, that you could spread it around from what is it called, Farmers Coliseum, wherever the Indiana State Fairgrounds, whatever that Coliseum is called nowadays. Then you have Lucas Oil and Bankers Life and Hinkle's right there. And if they want to venture outside to Indy, maybe they come down to Bloomington or go up to Mac. There are enough places that you could, I think, feasibly do it. If you want to keep it around Indianapolis logistically, I think hotels are there. I think it's a city that has such a good reputation to host things like that. And I think, with everything COVID wise, that it makes sense to try and minimize the travel, keep them all in, if not one location, maybe two. You saw that with Major League Baseball as you inch towards the World Series. The last few were played at two venues, and then they collapsed to one. So I think the idea is there, and the fact that it's Indianapolis and here in the home state, it's basketball. Why not bring it here?
Andy, your thought? I'm hoping that maybe it lessens up and they let a little more media in, and Delphi Bracketology can get media passes like we have in the past, and all I got to drive is 40 minutes to Indianapolis. But your thoughts on that news breaking here?
I think it makes sense. They can't afford, literally and figuratively cannot afford to not have the NCAA tournament for a second year in a row. So I think you have to come up with something that gives you the best chance of being able to have it go off without a hitch. And I think being able to be in a singular place that does have enough venues even within relatively close driving distance, that I think it makes complete sense to me. Any of the thoughts of people around, they're taking the student athletes out for that long, all those kinds of things. You don't know. They're doing a lot of things virtually today anyway. I don't, and again, there is the ongoing charade that it's not a multi-million-dollar enterprise as well, that you got to kind of get past at some point. So I think it makes sense. Would look forward to it. Like you, it would stink to be that close to something like that. That would be what we hope is once in a lifetime experience, but yet not be able to go in some form or fashion. But I think it'll be great. As Greg said, Indy has earned rave reviews anytime it's hosting major events and things like that. And there's a certain it's fitting to have such a big college basketball thing in Indiana. I think the one thing that I think the CBS podcast was talking about with trying to, could they use some of the high school gyms? I think the court not being as long might present some difficulties in that, but it would be pretty awesome to have at some of those, historic, high school venues. I'm just not sure that's necessarily feasible, but would be potentially interesting to even add that element to it as well.
I'm a proponent.
Maybe a little bit far-fetched, but would the NCAA, could they lay a different floor on some of the bigger high school gyms to make it possible?
I would imagine. As someone who knows absolutely nothing about whether that's possible, I would say sure. That seems feasible. I think some of them
makes sense
to the extent that you have the space.
It depends on the permanent,
maybe
the permanent baskets, how they're presented. Like at Newcastle, they have them in the ground. You're asking Newcastle to maybe move some baskets and stuff. Maybe the payday was enough that they could do. If you had the end bleachers on some, you could take those out and maybe extend it, but then you still had the I don't know what I think they could do that. That would be cool. I'm a proponent of moving the Final Four to Indianapolis permanently, like Omaha with baseball. The road to Indianapolis, basketball in Indiana. Let's just, we're doing it this year. Let's move it on. Gentlemen, thanks for a great show. I'm going to talk a little Hoosier hysteria. You're free to stay, or you can sign off. If you want to listen to my kind of craziness, you can. And Andy, you can pipe in, or Greg, you want to pipe in, that's fine too. Or you're free to go get a midnight snack. But Greg, thank you very much. We really appreciate your work and your support of Indiana athletics.
I appreciate it, guys. Anytime.
All righty.
Thanks, Greg.
Y'all have a good one.
Okay. You too. All right. For those of you in the chat mob, I'll take any and all questions here, but here's my list. And Andy, you can jump in too and criticize me or whatever. But I did watch with the critical eye 2 or 3 times that 15-minute extravaganza called Hoosier Hysteria. And remember, I don't like Hoosier Hysteria anyway, but I was glad just to see something. In this downtime, I was glad to see something, and as much as I don't like videos. But here's some things I really liked. Cliff Marshall, the zero talent. I think that's really big. I know a lot of programs talk motivation and stuff like that, but energy and effort, those are things that are going to bring Indiana back, quickly. And I really thought the segment with Cliff Marshall was really impressive. And I think they showed that because they're introducing the freshmen in a different way by seeing them come in and their work ethic. I think Cliff Marshall does a fantastic job. You saw a lot.
I think the other thing about that part too is, a lot of the times that this is a big recruiting event. And I think to the extent that you could take that out and show recruits, hey, this is the guy that we got doing strength and conditioning, just how important a role that is, what these guys are getting into and getting at. And some of them are getting out of it already that quickly. Potentially you strip that part out and do it where you got to at least try to have some recruiting flavor to it, or if nothing else, something that maybe is reusable that you could take from that.
And basketball-specific training. And I love Cliff Marshall talking about staying low and getting low and some of the slides they were doing. And, again, every program has strength coaches like that. But when you have guys that are really invested and did it on their own and then coming into a college program, that's just an extra level. Geronimo's 3,100 power index, whatever he did there, was in elite company, and Cliff, the look on his face was exciting. And, yes, Jared, here is your drop that you asked for. Turn your butt cheeks on. There you go. Now you got the drop that you asked for on the Twitter. Cliff Marshall with Christian Lander. I'm not quite sure what that has to do with basketball, but I thought the Cliff Marshall segment was really interesting. I'm not for the if you had a twin sister stuff. I know that's more for the fans. But here's the thing I took from all of that. Did you see the comfortability of Al Durham? That shows a senior who's been through a lot of stuff. He was laughing and comfortable, and some of those guys are just like, what do I say? What do I do? Those are young guys. They're trying to figure out how to behave in this program. Al's just ready to go. And I think that hopefully none of this means victories. I cannot promise you. I'm not here trying to sugarcoat IU as the next national championship. Just things that I as coach, you look for. That senior comfortability, that senior leadership, I think, Al, that really came out to me. As far as the basketball stuff, I think you're going to see, obviously you've heard about this ball screen stuff. You saw that was evident in those clips. If you look, there was one time when Christian Lander came off a handoff from Trace Jackson Davis, sat down and hit a three. You're going to see more guard-oriented offense. Again, the ball's got to go in the basket. They got to do it against opponents who scout. So it's no guarantee, as Kathy and some people were saying in the chat mob earlier, that we're going to shoot 100% if that's what we see, because every edited thing was a made basket, except Jerome Hunter's tip dunk. But you saw there was a comment, if you heard, a coach said short roll. And the short roll, usually when you hear pick and roll, the screener rolls all the way hard to the basket to try to force the defense to cover. But a short roll is one step off the ball screen. And what happens is if teams hedge, and college teams hedge, Lord knows we hedge. But when you hedge, you want to get 2 players on one, and you hit the short roll at the free throw line, and now you're playing 4-on-3. And some of those post moves where you saw Jerome Hunter, Race Thompson, Trace Jackson Davis, Joey Brunk catch at the free throw line and then run, drive in, those are short roll plays. But what you didn't see is if you look at any European basketball, and I've studied that this summer a lot for our high school team, we're running a lot of ball screens. But You have kicks to the corner. You have a low post option. You have a lot of things off of that short roll. So it's very interesting. The one thing I heard that was mic'd up, I don't know which coach said it, but he said, TJD, short roll, short roll. That means to me they're playing a high pick and roll. They also hit Joey Brunk on the same thing, and then Brunk throws it to the wing and does a second ball screen. Many European teams set multiple ball screens, and you don't get it off the first screen. You don't get it off the second screen. Sometimes you get it off the third screen, and so it looks like they're implementing some of that. What also is interesting to me is the pull-up jumpers and the aggressiveness of the guards. And yes, they picked some things to show, but you saw people catching and shooting threes. Archie wants to go to more guard-oriented. It looks like they're trying to. The aggressiveness of shooting, the pull-up game, even Rob Finnessy driving in, getting hit with the football dummy, shows me that they want to attack the lane north-south a little bit more. They still ran their double screen stuff. I saw a little bit of that. And then Trey Galloway, if you go back and watch it, he makes two incredible post feeds. So these rumors about Trey Galloway maybe starting, I don't know that they're true, but he makes two post feeds where I thought the post was guarded. I played him back in slow motion. There's a guy who's going to make his teammates better. If he can thread the post and be a post passer, we talk about shooting, we talk about toughness, we talk about defense, but passing, hitting the open man in a position to score, that was exciting to me to see his play. So that's a few takeaways from about 5 minutes of action, but as a coach, I'm just looking for stuff to give me some tells about what we might see. And one more thing. Trace shooting threes, or Race shooting threes, and Galloway shooting three. Two guys that kind of were questionable three-point shooters. The reason they showed them is they're trying to show recruits, Andy, or other people that the 4 spot is going to shoot the 3 this year, whether it's Jerome, Race, or whoever. So that's a quick take. If anyone has any questions, Andy, you have any questions from my perspective as a coach, what we saw in that limited version?
I need to go back and watch it now.
Watch it and slow it down.
I was walking around the house.
And obviously they're going to pick the best plays. They're not going to show Trey Galloway's turnover. You know, they're not going to show the brick from Armand Franklin. There was another thing, too. They showed a little transition. So they showed the most positive things of what they're attempting to do. And obviously you want to execute those at 60, 70% efficiency in a game to win games. They're never all going to be perfect. But Kathy asked, why didn't we see anything with Coach Miller? Well, you saw him at the beginning, at the end. Are you talking practice, Kathy, in the practice film? I addressed that in the community. I answered a question. Sometimes coaches have different ways of running practice. I know I had a year where I had 6 assistants, Andy, and we went to the Final Four. We were one game away from the state championship in 2003, and it was the best year I had because I'd sit at center court, and I wouldn't say anything. I'd have my notepad, and I'd watch a block-out drill at this basket. I'd watch a guarding a down screen on this basket, and if I wanted to talk to players, I'd call them over to me. So I would imagine what you saw, because you saw the coaches in the drills, that it takes a lot of energy to run drills and be a hype man at a basket for a drill, and your evaluation is better when you can pull yourself away. So I don't know that for sure. I'm not in there. I know that I coached better when I wasn't active at practice as a head coach, so I could really think about what I was seeing and evaluate players. Other head coaches love to get in there. That's part of their vibe, and they want to get in, and they want to be active in drills and rebound with the guys. All I know is I did better when I sat. Sometimes I'd sit in the bleachers and just watch. I'd teach the coaches and then expect the coaches to teach. More of a football type of mentality. So I'm expecting maybe, Kathy, that's why you didn't see him in many of the practice clips. Or they just wanted to show the assistants doing work. You know, you have Roberts, who's in his second year, and Hunter, who's first, and you want to give them some attention and let them know that they're active and show them how they participate. Because you do want to appreciate your coaches, too, and that might be a little way of saying, hey, I'm out of the limelight. These guys are the ones doing a lot of the work. So hopefully.
Yeah, I thought it was a little bit of a good way to get to know is way too strong, but with Kenya Hunter, kind of people getting familiar with him maybe is a
right, and that's the way I kind of interpreted it.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Coach, you already gave more time. I would have definitely taken the under on whatever time would have been thrown out for you discussing the answers to the if you had a twin sister question. So the fact that you discussed that at all, I was shocked by it. But your takeaway was good. You were thorough. You evaluated all parts of the video. So
beauty and outwards is not really important. But if I had a twin sister, I'd feel sorry for her. I wouldn't even want to have a twin brother. Two of me is bad, Andy. One's not so good. Oh, but no, I there's not enough to see, and you got to see a live scrimmage. And I do understand a lot of people saying, well, we want to see the misses, we want to see the turnovers. Yeah, you'll see that Wednesday when they play. By the way, I'm sorry, I said Tuesday. Our first high school game is Tuesday, and I had that in my mind. Indiana does start Wednesday, I think. In the first segment or second segment, I misstated that, so my bad.
Wednesday at 8, I believe, is the
Wednesday at that. So no, but again, you don't look at the ball going in the basket. You look at Jerome Hunter's going to play the 4. They have him with his back to his basket. They have him.
I was going to say that was the one thing that I noticed that you didn't bring up was that they showed him on a few occasions. Kind of working against race in the post a bit. And so I think that's a good sign. That was something he did a little. I feel like he did that more early last season when he would come in where you saw a little bit of that. Maybe my mind is because that feels like it's been about 6 years ago at this point. But I do recall him doing that a little bit more. And he certainly did that in high school based on his size. So I think he has that skill set in him, particularly even if he's playing the 3 to post up a smaller guy.
Hey, and I think it was John Blau or someone set a picture out today. They must have had another scrimmage today. Trey Galloway's shorts, man, 1980s. More reason to love the dude. He's got the real short hair, the short shorts, and his hair's all disheveled. Kind of looked like me when I was good looking, when my hair would just flow. Thanks, Kathy, for wishing me luck. I hope we play. We've already got a 1 cancellation. We have our 4-year senior. 4-year letterman is out for 2 weeks. His mom has COVID, so he's got to be quarantined. And our a sophomore guard that's a backup is out. So we're already starting to get hit a little bit with the COVID, and games are being canceled all over the state. So we hope that we play, just like we hope Indiana plays. Any other questions before we sign off from the chat mob about what we saw on Hoosier Hysteria? The other thing, too, the Archie Miller thing, that some of the clips were a scrimmage, and what you do is you put one assistant on one end and another assistant on the other, and the coach then just, again, sits and watches and then evaluates film. Oh, it's Dustin. Dustin noted the shorts. My bad. I'm messing up all over the place. Hey, Andy, I'm pretty happy. I ran a smooth board tonight. It's always my nervous I'm going to mess up.
Well done.
Insulators is really hard to say, though.
It really is. And then it sounds like, that's why the first time that I read it, I felt like I had to justify what I was doing so that people didn't think I was an idiot.
I know.
Insulators. Yeah. It's like, does this guy not know that it's insulators? And it's like, yeah, but I also want them to get their due and for people to know where to go. And then, luckily you're spelling it when you're given the website. But yeah, I had the same, I've had the same thing. I felt like I was more comfortable with it last week. But yeah, the first week I was like, you really feel like you need to enunciate so that people know what's going on. But
all's good. All right, everybody. I'm going to call it a night, get this file over to Jared. Again, stay positive, stay healthy, be thankful. Thanksgiving next week. I'm thankful for the crew here at Assembly Call. I'm thankful for all of you Indiana fans who've come to tailgate. Those of you in the chat mob, it's a good community. In times like this, we need each other. So let's go win a game.
Absolutely. All right. Let's see. I'd love to see one over the weekend.
Oh, that would be great.
I can't even tell you, being around these Ohio State fans since we've lived in Ohio for however many years, man.
I don't know
dare to dream, right?
I don't know if Delphi is ready for the reaction that I will display if we beat Ohio State. Hey, the chat mob might need to collect some bail money.
Oh, nice. We'll put something together for you. We'll take care of you.
Yeah. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.